Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 26 preview. We'll be taking a look at some of the key players that you might be looking to bring into your teams ahead of the blank game week. If you get any use out of today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So lots of people this week looking at Pedro Neto and Hwang Hee-chan, and you can understand why, because they have the best fixture in the Premier League this week against Sheffield United at home. We've seen multiple teams recently put Sheffield United to the sword, and therefore it feels like a really aggressive play in a blank game week where we're expecting probably a relatively low score. Lots of us might not even be fielding 11 players, and if you are, you've probably got a lot of clashes, and just bringing in a high upside player against the worst defence in the league feels like a pretty good idea. They then follow that with Newcastle, who are actually probably worse than Sheffield United defensively at the moment. Fulham at home is not a terrible fixture. They could potentially have a fixture in 29, and then obviously it's Villa away. But after game week 30, the fixtures actually continue a little bit for Wolves. So if you do bring in a Wolves asset and you're not looking to wildcard until later in the season, or if you've potentially already wildcarded, you could hold them all the way through until the final few game weeks. So I do really like the idea of Pedro Neto and Hwang Hee-chan. Just on the fixtures, and specifically the fixture in game week 29, for them to have a fixture in Game Week 29, they need two different things to happen in the FA Cup 5th round, and we find out the results of the FA Cup 5th round between Game Week 26 and 27. So, if Brighton beat Wolves in the FA Cup 5th round, and Leicester beat Bournemouth, then Wolves will have a fixture against Bournemouth at home in 29. So you need both Brighton to beat Wolves and Leicester to beat Bournemouth for their fixture in 29 to go ahead. Now, it's more unlikely than it is likely, but could that happen? I think I would arguably expect Brighton to beat Wolves, and then could Leicester pull off a result against Bournemouth? Absolutely they could. So there is still a chance that Wolves actually play in 29, but I do want to just lock into your minds that it's more likely to not go ahead than it is to go ahead. So at the moment, maybe go off the basis that it's probably not going to go ahead. But you are sort of taking a bit of a gamble here. And if that fixture does go ahead, you're not only getting them for Sheffield United, Newcastle, Fulham, you've then got them for the fixture in 29 as well. And obviously, if you are free hitting in 29, then that's less of an issue. But I just wanted to cover the different permutations that need to happen in order for that to be a fixture in 29. So fixtures-wise, they tick pretty much every box apart from a little bit uncertainty in 29. Data-wise, it's not terrible, but it's not fantastic for either of them. I think when they're both fully fit, they are absolutely now. And I think especially with Cunha out, they need both Hwang and Neto to be playing pretty much every minute available for Wolves. So I would expect them to start every game. Obviously, they have both just come back from injuries. Hwang Hee-chan more recently than Neto. But once they're back up to fitness, and I think they're probably quite close, both of them, I would expect them to play pretty significant minutes. Neto does appear to be slightly more nailed this season than Hwang. But I think in the more recent weeks before Hwang went off to the Asian Cup, he was arguably just as important to that Wolves side. So I think both of them are very, very nailed on in that Wolves team. When we look at the underlying data, I would say it is ever so slightly in favour of Hwang just for me. So FPL points-wise, Hwang slightly outperforming Neto. Expected FPL points-wise, again, Hwang slightly outperforming Neto. Here's where I think Hwang is just a slightly better option than Neto. It comes down to goal threat. So Neto's got a 0.2 non-penalty XG. Hwang has a 0.31 non-penalty XG. What you can actually see, though, is Neto has higher creativity than Hwang. So whilst Hwang is the greater goal threat, Neto will create more. So I would expect them to get a similar number of returns. I'm just expecting Hwang to have more goals and Neto to have more assists. And I would always rather bring in the player that is likely to get you more goals. On top of that, we think that there is a good chance that Hwang is on penalties. There would have been some debate around whether Cunha took them or Hwang took them, but it looks like Cunha will be out for a while now, so we would expect Hwang to be on them. All I would say, I saw someone post this on X, so this isn't my own research, but I did see it. Apparently, Sarabia has scored 17 out of 17 career penalties, and recently he actually took a penalty earlier in the season when Hwang wasn't available. And on top of that, when Hwang took his penalty before he went off to the Asian Cup, Sarabia wasn't on the pitch. So I will just float the idea out there that there is a chance that Hwang actually isn't on penalties, and it could potentially be Sarabia, but my opinion is I do still expect him to take them. So we'll have to wait and see. It would have been nice to potentially get a penalty of Hwang and Sarabia on the pitch, but maybe there is a small chance that Hwang's not. I would kind of like to take the gamble, though, because if he is, that just makes him an even better option than Neto. And then, as you can see, the other nice thing about Hwang is he's just involved in more big chances per 90 than Neto. So Hwang got involved in almost one big chance involvement per 90, and then Pedro Neto has 0.68. I think they are both absolutely excellent options for their price, but when you tell me that Hwang's got the greater goal threat, the possibility of penalties, and he is 0.2 million cheaper in case that does matter in the future, I think I would just lean to Hwang Hee-chan. But if you've just got a bit of a taste for Neto, let's say you just prefer him as a player, you like watching him, you trust the eye test more than data, then just go for Neto, because I think it's very, very marginal, the difference between them. There's not a massive difference in the stats. There's not a massive difference in the positions that they're getting into. Pedro Neto might have a few set pieces, but Hwang's likely to have penalties, we think, potentially. So I don't think there's a massive amount to separate them. I will probably be going Hwang Hee-chan this week if I bring in a midfielder from Wolves, simply because I like the goal threat and the pens. But I would love to know down below in the comments, do you have a preference either way? And if you're on a wildcard this week, because a few are, is there some temptation to just attack the next 3 or 4 fixtures with double Wolves midfield? So as well as the Wolves mids getting a lot of attention this week, the Aston Villa mids are also getting a bit of attention. Maybe not quite as much, but they are starting to come more and more into my thinking. And they're at a very similar price point to Neto and Hwang. Hwang's at 5.5, Neto 5.7. We've got Douglas Luiz at 5.5 and Bailey at 5.6. So very similar price points. And I would argue very similar options in regards to how many points you would probably expect them to get over the upcoming game weeks. The reason that I really, really like Aston Villa mids, maybe even above and beyond Wolves mids, and I'm sort of going back and forth on this, I think Aston Villa mids are absolutely perfect if your chip strategy is to not free hit in 29 and to wildcard in either 30 or 31. So I do think it is pretty essential that by the Game Week 27 deadline, doesn't have to be by Game Week 26, but by the 27 deadline, once we have the fifth round FA Cup results, you almost have to have a chip strategy, not locked in, but in your mind, because you need to start thinking, do I need to build to 29 with free transfers, or am I just going to free hit in that week? And if you're going to free hit in that week, what are you thinking about the future? When are you playing your wild card? These are things you need to think about. But my current strategy is to use free transfers and the odd hit to get through blank game week 29, and then either wildcard after that in 30 or potentially 31. And the reason that I say 31 is a lot of the players that you'll need in 29 actually don't have a terrible fixture in 30 either, as, for example, Aston Villa don't, right? They have Wolves at home in 30, so I may well wildcard in 31. And if that is your plan, what you're getting is 5 pretty good fixtures here, especially from an attacking perspective. Forest at home is a home fixture, and although Forest have been good defensively, I don't mind that. Luton away, again, I would prefer this one to be at home, but it's still an okay fixture. Spurs are not a particularly good defence. West Ham are the second worst defence in the league over the last 6, and Wolves at home is, again, a pretty good fixture, especially given that it is a home game. So I really like those next 5, and the other brilliant thing is they are confirmed to have a fixture in 29. So with an Aston Villa mid, you're getting coverage for both of the upcoming blanks and good fixtures in and around that. I would argue the worst fixture of the bunch is Game Week 28, but if you look ahead to Game Week 28, you probably don't need all of your attackers. For most of us, we're going to have probably the likes of Solanke, you might have a Barkley or a Morris, because it's obviously double Game Week 28 for Bournemouth and Luton. So it may well be that that's actually a week where it removes your benching headache slightly, just being able to bench your Aston Villa midfielder. So I really do like the look of them. My issue is Douglas Luiz, I'm just not keen on for numerous reasons, as we'll discuss in a second, and Leon Bailey's minutes haven't been secure. So whilst an Aston Villa mid on paper looks perfect, I just don't see an option that is completely foolproof. So if we're going based off minutes, like Douglas Luiz is so much better of an option. Bailey's minutes just will not be secure. Let me actually bring up Bailey's minutes because it's quite interesting. He's only played 90 minutes once this season, and that was in Game Week 20 against Burnley when he got his 8-pointer. Outside of that, let me just read off his minutes from, let's say, I don't know, Game Week 19. He got 76, 90, and we were like, oh, Bailey's starting and getting good minutes. Then 63, then 28, 59, 72, 80. As you can see on your screen, he's averaging 50 minutes per game this season. It's just not very good. And so we'll look at his stats in a minute, and I'll say Bailey's stats per 90 are really good, but he's not getting 90. And I'll say in a minute, Douglas Luiz's stats per 90 are very poor, but he's getting much closer to 90, and that has to be taken into consideration. What I would say is over time, it's becoming more and more apparent that Bailey just is so much better than any of their other attackers outside of Ollie Watkins. Diaby is just nowhere near the level of Bailey this season, and I just think quality-wise, Bailey has one up on him, and I think Emery knows that. The issue that we've got is that because Konsa is injured, Matty Cash has to play. And having spoken to some Villa fans, Cash and Bailey just don't work very well as a combo. They fill very similar positions in an attacking sense. They almost fall out for each other's feet. So with Cash confirmed to be playing because Konsa's out and they don't have another right back really, it maybe makes Bailey's minutes a little bit weaker. But I just think Bailey will start more minutes than not. And even with the fact that he's getting less minutes than Douglas Luiz, I would still kind of fancy him to outscore him. So when we look at the actual data, actually both of them are outperforming their expected data. So 5.02 FPL points per 90 for Douglas Luiz this season, 7.31 for Bailey. But again, bear in mind, Bailey's not getting 90. And then both of them outscoring their expected FPL points as well. But definitely Bailey, if they were getting similar minutes, is the one that's coming out on top. Non-penalty expected goals is the reason that I absolutely hate Douglas Luiz as a pick, even though I may well go for him myself. Yes, he's on penalties. And yes, as you can see by his touch map, he takes a lot of in-swinging corners. But his data outside of that is just so bad. 0.11 non-penalty expected goals is actually worse than a lot of defenders that you'd be looking at. Like that means that across a 10-game spell, he would be expected to get 1 goal from open play. And his creativity is not even very good either. The creativity suggests every 7 games or so, he's going to get you an assist. I don't want to bring in a player that the data tells me is going to get a goal every 10 games and assist every 7 games. And yes, I do think he'll get more goals because of penalties and he'll get more assists because of set pieces. That is absolutely true. And I should also note, Douglas Luiz has one hell of a strike on him. In a similar way to Rodri, you might expect him to outperform his expected goals because he takes a lot of long shots and he's actually pretty good at them. So I will acknowledge all of that, but I just don't know that I can bring myself to bring in a player with 0.11 non-penalty expected goals. Bailey's data is much better, but also, like I said, you have to take into account the minutes. But 0.25 non-penalty expected goals, it's okay. It's not fantastic. He's actually not a particularly great goal threat, but he backs up okay goal threat with very good creativity. So he's got 0.34 expected assist. That puts him at a 0.59 non-penalty expected goal involvement, which is just so much better. I mean, it's well over double of what we see with Douglas Luiz, or just over double, I should say. So I still think, based on this, even if you told me Bailey's going to get 65 minutes on average and Douglas Luiz is going to get 85 to 90 on average, I still kind of fancy a punt on Leon Bailey. The other reason that I would lean towards Leon Bailey instead of Douglas Luiz is, I think for most of us, if you're bringing in an Aston Villa defender, like I said, it's probably, midfielder, it's likely because you're not free hitting in 29. And I think if you're not free hitting in 29, you are likely lining up a wildcard in 30 or 31. So we're only looking at 4 or 5 game weeks. Across the remainder of the season, Douglas Luiz may well outscore Bailey due to being on pens and due to his minutes. But over the next 4 weeks, if Bailey gets a reasonable amount of minutes, and obviously the upside that he has, I just kind of slightly prefer him and think he has the potential to outscore Douglas Luiz. I will just say that it's just the way that I prefer to play the game. I like players that have good data and good open play goal threat or assist threat. And unfortunately, whilst he's an incredibly good footballer, Douglas Luiz just doesn't have that. So I'll leave it there. I do think he's a fine option. You'll see a lot of analytics and models accounts really like Douglas Luiz, and he has a lot to like. But for me, if you're choosing one or the other, I do prefer Leon Bailey. So the final 2 midfielders we're going to look at today are actually Jarrod Bowen and Mohamed Kudus. And I know that might seem crazy given that they're so much more expensive than the 4 aforementioned midfielders. And West Ham have been performing very, very poorly recently. But you have to remember, at points, Bowen and Kudus have been very good FPL assets this season and delivered lots and lots of points for us. And I just think they tick quite a few boxes with regard to the fixtures coming up that could make them potentially worth a punt if you want to go for it. So what we like about them is in the next 4 game weeks, they've got 3 home fixtures, which is obviously very nice. Burnley at home being an absolutely exceptional fixture in game week 28. But the real thing that we love is they are confirmed to have a fixture in 26 and 29. So along with Aston Villa, they're one of few teams that actually have some desirable assets that are confirmed to play in both of the blank game weeks. Again, if you are looking to free hit in 29, I would argue that they're probably not right up there, high up on your priority list, I would say. Although the fixtures surrounding that are fine as well. I think it is, again, along with the Aston Villa assets, really a nice pick if you are looking to potentially delay the free hit and then wildcard around 30 or 31. So fixtures-wise, they tick all of the boxes. I think the reason that we've seen really poor performances recently from West Ham is largely due to Paquetá being out. I don't buy into the fact that Paquetá comes back and they're suddenly a brilliant top 4 team again. I think all season they have been struggling, and I think some, not lucky results, but well-fought results at the start of the season maybe put them in a slightly better league position than what we thought they would be, and I think it's starting to catch up to them now. So I don't think they are a top team, but they're certainly better than what we've seen recently, and I think once Paquetá's back, and it looks like it could be this week with latest news, if not the week after, it does make them a much stronger team, and hopefully he can stay fit for them. However, Kudus in particular's data this season has not been good at any point. Whether Paquetá's been there, whether he's played through the middle, on the right, on the left, he's just not been particularly good for West Ham from a data perspective. Performances-wise, he's exceptional. And this is where you have to decide, are you a grass FC manager? Do you prefer the eye test? Or are you more of an analytics manager? I love watching football, by the way. I've watched football my whole life, and it might not come across in videos, but I use that a lot with my decision-making. But in these videos, I try to present the data to you, and you can't look at this data and like it at all. So minutes-wise, I actually think they're both pretty nailed, but Bowen's definitely the better 4 minutes, and that's mainly due to the injuries as well. He just doesn't really get injured very often, and when he's available, he'll play 90 minutes. So Bowen's definitely the safer for minutes. When we look at actual FPL points, Kudus has been outperforming Bowen, right? He's actually been getting quite a lot of FPL points, which is why his data is so surprising when you actually look into it, because look at their expected FPL points. Kudus' expected FPL points are 3.82. He is overperforming his expected FPL points by 2 points per 90, which is actually a ridiculous number. And Bowen is just slightly overperforming his expected FPL points. Across the season, when we look at their non-penalty expected goals, Bowen's is actually really, really good. And this is why I've owned Bowen at points this season, because his goal threat from open play is up there with the very, very best in the Premier League for midfielders. 0.37 is an extremely strong number for a player that, again, I know he's not on penalties and he's not always playing through the middle, but he just seems to pop up in the box and get chances. So I really like that. You can see that Kudus is down at 0.16. Which isn't much above Douglas Luiz, who's kind of a box-to-box, if not slightly defensive midfielder. The issue with Kudus is he then follows that up with really poor expected assist as well at 0.12. So Kudus' data is actually very, very similar to Douglas Luiz's. But Kudus isn't on pens, and he's not on set pieces either, whereas Douglas Luiz is on both of those. So when you just look at the data, Kudus actually isn't a better asset than Douglas Luiz, and this really shocked me how bad the data was. I then decided to actually look into more recent performances. Maybe just before he went off to AFCON and also recently since he's come back. Has Kudus' data been slightly better? Maybe he just had a poor start to the Premier League whilst he acclimatised. It's actually like so much worse than I thought. So in Kudus' last 5 appearances, so since game week 19, he's played almost 500 minutes, so it's a decent sample size. He's currently sat at his 0.15 non-penalty expected goal involvement, which is actually worse than Kyle Walker. Genuinely. His expected goals is 0.09, and his expected assist is 0.06. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Kudus is a bad player because he has been brilliant this season. He passes the eye test. I do think he's a very talented footballer, but that does not matter in FPL, and he is just not getting close to the number of chances required to be a good asset. You can actually see by his touch map just above my big bald egg, there are absolutely no touches in the box. Well, there are a few, but if you look in comparison to Bowen's touch map, Kudus is just operating in an area which is great for West Ham, but it's not getting in many FPL returns. So unless we see a dramatic increase in these numbers, I just don't think you can consider Kudus a particularly good FPL option. With Bowen, the data across the season is fine, but if I just go back to over the last 6, and I am using Fantasy Football Hub, by the way, there is a link down below in the description if you want to check out the data yourself. Since game week 19, Bowen has had 7 appearances, 630 minutes. His data's been really poor, but again, I do think Paquetá being out has affected that, but it's 0.14 non-penalty expected goals and 0.12 expected assists. So that data has just dropped off a cliff. In all honesty, I'd avoid West Ham assets, but if you are really locking yourself, you know for a fact you don't want to free hit in 29, let's say you've already got an Aston Villa mid, you've already got a Richarlison, but you want to add another mid that you know for a fact has decent fixtures and will play in 29, I suppose you could do worse than Bowen and Kudus. I think I would just attack the upside now, though, in bringing in a Hwang or a Neto, or just bringing another Aston Villa midfielder for me. I think both Bailey and Douglas Luiz at the moment are better options than these two, and I would argue, even if they don't have a fixture in 29, both Hwang and Neto probably are as well. So finally, I wanted to take a look at two Manchester United players that a lot of people are considering, given this slight improvement in Manchester United's attacking threat in recent weeks, and also given the fixtures that are coming up for them as well. And that is Garnacho and Rasmus Hojlund. I will try to park my Manchester United bias aside, but I do like to caveat by saying I am a Manchester United fan. The reason I say that is it gives you a bit of an idea that I do watch, obviously, a lot of our games, but on top of that, I may naturally be sometimes actually more pessimistic, but often sometimes optimistic as well. So obviously, you decide how much you think these opinions are biased. Fixtures-wise, I do love them. The reason that I do love them is actually the only difficult fixture is Game Week 27. But again, for a lot of us, we've probably got 8 good attackers, and it actually solves a benching headache in 27. I've looked ahead, and if I bring in a Manchester United asset, it actually kind of helps my decision in Game Week 27. I know that's not necessarily a great reason to bring in an asset, but I guess what I'm saying is that Man City fixture shouldn't put you off for most people, because I would imagine you can get away with benching them. So Fulham at home, City away, Everton at home. It's then Sheffield United at home, but that fixture is not confirmed. So just to go through what needs to happen in order for Manchester United versus Sheffield United to go ahead in 29. We basically need Manchester United to lose to Nottingham Forest in the 5th round of the FA Cup. That's it. Just the one fixture. And Manchester United have lost to Nottingham Forest this season. So if that happens again, Man United versus Sheffield United will go ahead. So that then begs the question, is it worth taking a risk and gambling on a Manchester United asset this week? Because let's say you bring in Garnacho or Hojlund, or both potentially, and they then get that fixture in 29. You're then sat there. You probably wouldn't need to use the free hit with 2 attacking assets against the best fixture in the league in Sheffield United at home. Obviously, it could go the other way. The favourites for that fixture, especially given the way that Man United are performing, are that Manchester United will beat Forest. And if that happens, you then have a blank for Manchester United. So then the fixtures go from really good to Fulham, City, Everton, blank. Again, it does depend on your chip strategy around Game Week 29, and we won't find that out until before the Game Week 27 deadline. But it may potentially be worth taking a gamble on that fixture going ahead. So now we've looked at the fixtures. Are either of these assets worth bringing in? So you've got their data across the season once again, but on the side, I've also pulled up their data across the last 6 matches to see if there has been an improvement. And little spoiler alert, there has been a bit of an improvement. But across the season, their data's okay. It's not particularly great, but it has improved recently, as I said, which has bumped up their overall season numbers. I want to specifically, though, look at their non-penalty expected goals, because this is what I actually like about Garnacho and Hojlund. Their data overall is okay. We're looking at about a 0.4 XGI for both per 90, which is, I would sit it at about an average piece of underlying data. But the majority for both, especially Hojlund, is made up through goal threat. And that's what I really like, because sometimes you look at an asset and you go, they've got good expected goal involvement, but it's basically only assist threat. For the two of them, they're actually not particularly creative, but they do get the chances to score goals. And you can kind of see that with their touch maps as well. They get quite a few touches in the box. So for Garnacho, we're looking at 0.3 non-penalty expected goals. And for Hojlund, we're looking at 0.36 non-penalty expected goals. So every 3 games or so, we're expecting to get a goal based on the underlying data. And from what we've seen in recent games, I would argue that both Garnacho and Hojlund are maybe slightly above average finishers, especially Hojlund. I just think he is a naturally very, very good finisher. So that's quite promising. But again, there's not much creativity going on with the two of them. So you're probably relying on goals, and you're not likely to get many assists. Big chance involvement-wise, Rasmus Hojlund is getting more big chances, both for himself and creating them on a per 90 basis than Garnacho. So Hojlund's getting almost a big chance involvement every 90 minutes. So data-wise, good, not great. But like I said, I just checked the data over the last 6, and it's a lot more promising for the two of them. So Garnacho's goal threat has stayed almost identical, but he has slightly upped his assist threat to 0.19 XA. So there's a little bit of a bump for Garnacho, and there's actually quite a big bump for Hojlund, but again, not in his assist threat, which has stayed identical. He's had a 0.14 bump in his XG. So his non-penalty expected goals has gone from 0.36 to 0.5. So yes, I do think both Garnacho and Hojlund at the moment are on a relatively hot streak, obviously Hojlund in particular, but not only are they on a hot streak, they're also improving their data. And the reason that I think that's important is sometimes players can go on a hot streak. We've seen this in the past, like Almiron and Lingard of previous seasons, where they're just scoring because they're feeling confident, but they're not necessarily getting more chances or getting higher quality chances. And I'm less tempted to jump on a player when they're scoring, but they're not getting the chances to score the goals, and they're maybe just on that hot streak. But with these two, they're not only converting the points, but they're also getting the underlying data to go along with it, which tells me that we could see a continuation of Garnacho and Hojlund delivering points. So I would say cautiously optimistic that the two of them could be good assets. The issue we've got is just like, where do they fit in? Because for Garnacho, he's competing with the likes of Hwang and Neto. Money isn't a massive issue at the moment, and he's not that much cheaper. I think I'd probably prefer Hwang and Neto at the moment. The data, not too dissimilar for them, but I just think that the fixture is so much better this week for Hwang and Neto. And I would argue over the next few, I'd probably expect them to potentially outscore him. So that's the issue with Garnacho, although you could maybe squeeze him in alongside. With Hojlund, the issue isn't necessarily that I don't think he'll do well. It's like, where do you fit him in with your forwards? So I want you to picture a situation, because I think most people are like me. Your front three might look something like Watkins, Haaland, Darwin, right? That seems to be a very popular front three at the moment. If you've got Watkins and Haaland, you're not taking them out. Like, I don't understand taking them out this week. Watkins has a really nice run of fixtures, and he is delivering points for fun. Haaland is Haaland, and I know he was disappointing in the double game week, but I don't see you taking out Haaland before Bournemouth away. That means that your final spot is Darwin. You say, yeah, Darwin blanks this week. He's going to blank in 29. I'll just sell Darwin to Hojlund. Darwin to Hojlund. If that's the case, where are you getting Solanke in 27? Because in 27, Solanke plays Burnley, and then he has a double game week of Sheffield United at home and Luton at home. So in 2 game weeks, you get Burnley, Sheffield United, and Luton for Solanke. Solanke has to come in 27, at the very latest 28. You're not going to bring him in for Watkins or Haaland, because Haaland you don't ever really want to take out unless you want to take that risk. And Watkins has good fixtures, but also then plays in blank game week 29. And you probably don't really want to do the hokey-cokey there. So I just kind of feel like, where does Hojlund fit in? Unless you're just going to say, I'm just going to go for Hojlund in 26, and then in 27 I take Hojlund out and then bring in Solanke then. I would just save the transfers and just go for Solanke now. So my issue with Hojlund isn't that I don't think he's good. I think he's fantastic. I love him as a footballer, and the data's definitely improving, but it's where do you squeeze him in? Because then on top of that, you could say, well, maybe you don't have a Watkins or a Haaland, or you're not that interested in Solanke. I'll just chuck Tony in there as well, a player that continues to return, and again, has a really good fixture in 29. Would you not just want to get an Ivan Toney in potentially, who's on pens and also has good data and has the fixture in 29 confirmed? So there's just so little spots for so many good forwards at the moment that it is very difficult. So basically, really like Garnacho, really like Hojlund. There's definitely improvement in their data. The fixtures are good as well. They may have a fixture in 29. If you can squeeze them in, go for it. But I wouldn't be willing to squeeze them in to then take them back out again. I think if you're bringing them in, you kind of bring them in and you have to keep them for a little bit. And that unfortunately may mean sacrifices elsewhere. So I think midfield transfers will probably dominate this week, mainly because obviously a lot of people have Jota and he's injured and he blanks, but alongside also Palmer, Richarlison, etc. So I wanted to focus on midfielders in this video. But I know a lot of people obviously own the likes of Bradley, Van Dijk, maybe if Porro is confirmed to be out longer, which I don't yet know. I think defender transfers may be slightly popular this week as well. And I did hesitate to even discuss this because it's so difficult. It's just so dependent on your strategy. And I think especially around game week 29, if you are building towards trying to not free hit in 29, I do think it makes sense to bring in a player that plays in that week. You could potentially be in a position where you've not committed to free hit 29, but you've also not committed. Maybe you're just keeping your options open until next week. If that's the case, I think you could go in a number of directions, but it really is up to you to decide on your own strategy. And once you've decided on that strategy, make the appropriate decision. But let me just talk through some of the key defenders that I'll be looking to own at the moment. Number 1 is Gabriel. I actually don't really care if your strategy is to free hit or not in 29. I still think Gabriel's the best transfer for this week, because he's got Newcastle, then Sheffield United, then Brentford, and he could even play in blank game week 29. But even if not, the way that I'm looking at this, would you be surprised if Gabriel with 3 fixtures over the next 4 outscores most other defenders with 4 fixtures over the next 4? No, I really wouldn't, especially given that 2 of them are Sheffield United and Brentford, and I could even see a clean sheet against Newcastle. So, and on top of that, I should say, Gabriel has some of the best goal threat in the Premier League for defenders. So I just kind of feel like it doesn't even matter if he doesn't play in 29. I would just get Gabriel if you don't already own him. In second and third, I do have 2 assets that are confirmed to play in both blank game week 26 and blank game week 29, and that is Pau Torres and Reguilon. If you are looking for a player that you need for 29 because you don't want to free hit or you've already used your free hit, it has to be one of these 2 for me. I just don't see any other options that are confirmed to have a fixture in 29. Pau Torres is the best Aston Villa defender to own. I know they've lost Kamara. I know they've lost Konsa for a little while. Mings, no sign of him yet anyway. Diego Carlos could be out for up to 6 weeks with his hamstring. So I'm fully aware they've got lots of injuries and their defence will not be as strong. But it's still not a bad defence. And I still expect them to keep clean sheets. And with the fixtures that they've got, there's certainly worse options out there. But I do think that the only fully nailed asset that you know for a fact, if he's fit, will get you through to Game Week 29 is Pau Torres. Longley could drop out at any point, given the fact his performances have been poor, and he's also left-footed alongside Pau Torres. Yes, Cash is fine, but we could see it as some sort of experiment where they play Chambers there, or as obviously as soon as Conster's back, then Cash drops out. Let's say that Conster's back sooner than expected, and he's back for like 27, 28, then immediately you might lose Cash there. And I think with Moreno and Luca Dean, they're both fighting for left-back, so I just don't think I would take the risk there either. So for me, it is Pau Torres is the only Aston Villa defender you can go for. For Brentford, obviously Pinnock is out injured. We don't yet know for how long. I do like Ben Mee. He's got some attacking threat, but I would just go for Reguilon. He's so cheap, looks relatively nailed. He's got assist threat, and he keeps on popping up higher up the pitch. So I do think you'll get some attacking returns and bonus point with Reguilon as well. So those would be the two that I'll be looking at if you need a player in 29. I've then got Saliba in fourth. The reason that Saliba's in fourth and Gabriel's in first, you might just say, why are they not just both first, is Saliba's attacking threat just is not as good as Gabriel's, and he's more expensive. So I just prefer Gabriel as an option. I don't think they are on par. So I think if you don't own Gabriel, you definitely go out and get him. If you don't own Saliba, there's some justification to go for some other cheaper assets ahead of him. But I do still really like him. And in a similar way to Gabriel, would I be surprised if Saliba with 3 fixtures outscores Pau Torres and Reguilon with 4 fixtures? Again, I wouldn't particularly be so. So don't be scared to go out and buy the likes of Saliba and Gabriel. And I've just finished with 2 assets that, again, we don't know if they'll play in 29 because they're playing each other. So to confirm, if Brighton beat Wolves and Leicester beat Bournemouth, then they will play in Game Week 29, these two. But if either of these things don't happen, i.e. if Wolves beat Brighton or if Bournemouth beat Leicester, then they'll both blank. But they've just got a lot of high upside over the coming weeks. Aït-Nouri's obviously got Sheffield United at home this week. He's got really good fixtures coming up, and he's got a lot of attacking threat. His data's actually not that mind-blowing, but this is more of an eye test thing. He's just popping up quite high on the pitch in a similar way to what we see from the likes of Reguilon and Doughty. He's just finding himself in positions where he could get you attacking returns. So I like Aït-Nouri for the upside. And then Senesi or Senesi, apparently it's actually Senesi, so we're going to go with that. Senesi, the reason I like him is because of the double game week in 28. It is just remarkably good. Sheffield United at home and Luton at home. Doesn't get any better. And he plays Burnley in game week 27. So in the next 3 game weeks, you have 3 of the best fixtures you could possibly have. The issue with Senesi is he plays Man City this week. So if you're taking like a -4 to bring in a defender for this week, and he's got Man City, it just doesn't feel particularly great. But he does have the attacking threat. He has the fixtures as well. So I do really like him if you're willing to just sacrifice this 1 week. So I'll leave it there with the defenders because I think it is incredibly team dependent. But those are some of the defenders that I'll be looking at. There are, of course, further options as well. And I would love to know down below if you are making a defender transfer this week, who are you looking to bring in? So guys, there we have it. We've looked at 8 players in detail today and then followed that up with a bit of a discussion around the key defenders. And if that video was useful for you, please do smash that like button. Let's aim for 2,000 likes on today's video. And if you've not yet subscribed to the channel and you've watched to this point, please do consider subscribing. I do really appreciate it. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.